Quantumania is real bad. You don't need me to tell you that. You've seen the review scores and the video essays and possibly even watched the movie, bless your soul. I'm just fashionably late because of course I am. Released just 17 years after Nacho Libre, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is a superhero action film where Ant-Man and the Wasp, shrinking superheroes, search for a way out of Quantumania, a subatomic city ruled by a reality-ending interdimensional tyrant. The 2022 lineup of Marvel films were generally received as bad, mostly because they were, but this movie wasn't released in 2022. It was released mid-February of 2023, so just maybe, no. The writing is poor, the setting is fundamentally unfit for Ant-Man, and there are plenty of plot holes. We open with Janet in the quantum realm seeing a ship crash. She goes to investigate, but she gets jumped by quantum beasts. Luckily, the ship's pilot shoots them with the gun he has. We'll get back to that. Then we cut to Scott Lang just walking around, getting coffee, etc., while explaining that his life doesn't really make sense. Turns out he's reading at a book reveal. I forgot what they're called. In the crowd is this kid with big-ass ears. He's irrelevant, but I couldn't just ignore him. Scott gets a call from jail saying that Cassie has been arrested. Cassie in the first two Ant-Man films really liked the idea of working alongside her father, but since he was gone for 5 years of her life, she became more independent. She's also smart now. She studied Hank's lab in the time that people were gone and even built the quantum GPS that kickstarts the plot. Yet I still find her character bland in this movie. She's not seen being intelligent, she's not seen being independent, and the fact that she's a revolutionary, which is something she is never explored. I get that it's not a big question to answer why a teenager wants things to be better, it's what we do, but it's essentially the one shown character trait for what is essentially an entirely new character. I don't think it's asking too much that they look into that thing. In fact, how does the plot get kickstarted? Well, Hank and Cassie allude to something they've been working on. They made smart ants, we'll get back to that, and they built a sort of GPS for the quantum realm, allowing them to study it without going down there. Janet hears this and turns the machine off out of fear. Before she can explain herself, they get sucked into Quantumania. We'll get back to that. When they arrive in Quantumania, they get split up. Scott and Cassie land in a field of floating rocks, whereas the Pyms land in a forest that's actively being patrolled. The next hour of the film is spent getting these two groups back together. That means there are two storylines happening simultaneously, or at least I think they're happening simultaneously. It's genuinely difficult to tell because of the way these scenes are paced. We'll get back to that. Scott tries to radio to the others, but that doesn't work, and Cassie expresses the same level of concern as someone that didn't study for an English test. Eventually, they're saved from a big thing by Laserface and others who capture Cassie and Scott. Back to the Pyms, Hope and Hank try to get Janet to explain some things, but she refuses, saying, "We don't have time to talk, Henry." She takes 2 steps before turning all the way around and saying, "And why didn't you listen? I told you to stay away from here." They agree to talk later. 12 seconds later, yes, I counted, Hank asks why they couldn't see Quantumania from the surface, and Janet gives a detailed explanation. Back to Scott. Cassie somehow got ahead of him while getting kidnapped. Scott is put into a circle of people, and Cassie tells him to drink the ooze, having obviously drank some ooze herself. Now, they put all of this on her chin to make it clear that she had drank ooze, but that just means she didn't wipe her mouth. Back to the Pyms. People with guns and spears race towards them in speeders. One guy goes up to him, draws a knife. Janet cuts off his arm, stabs him in the chest. He grows his arm back. They laugh together, and then he gives them new clothes and a vehicle. What was this scene? It only serves the purpose of getting them a new ride that they only use once to get to the next scene. She doesn't even ask for a knife. She is a wanted outlaw. It's also such a damn cliche. Like, you couldn't have written a uniquely bad character interaction. Back to the Langs. People are chanting something in an alien language. One thing inspects Ant-Man, and then 2 people bring out an hourglass filled with red ooze. He fights and kicks and screams like a toddler, but they still manage to force the ooze into his mouth. What do you think this ooze does? Because the scene clearly expects you to think it's something bad. Like, it even cuts in the middle of the scene to add suspense. Turns out the ooze makes them understand each other. Now, not only did I guess that the ooze was good, I guessed this exactly. A tribe chanting something ritualistic that seems menacing but is actually helpful is kinda cliche. This setup kills the subversive nature of the subversion, and it's definitely not funny. About the whole funny thing, this movie is not funny. But I can't dock points for that because it's not listed as a comedy. Like, the other Ant-Man films are listed as comedies, but not this one, which is incredibly odd. Like, don't get me wrong, I agree. On the list of this movie's sins, I cannot add false advertising. Anyways, they bring out Quaz the telepath, who determines Scott's name and origin. They ask if he's a spy, and Cassie comes in and says, "Guys, no, it's okay. We're not spies. He's my dad." What did that prove? Why was that written as if they know each other? Because that means they got awfully familiar in the 0 screen time they had together. They explain that they're from Earth, and Quaz determines that they're telling the truth, but Barbarian Lady, who I'll be calling Barbie until she gets a name, says, "It doesn't matter. You come from above, like him, and he will burn the world to find you." And they ask, "Who?" And she says, "The Conqueror." Back to the Pims, they land in a city that looks like it was just ripped right out of Star Wars. A lot of the movie is like that. Hank talks about how he theorized that life down here was possible, but let me stop you right there. No, you didn't, because how? Genuinely, like, how would life even begin to form down here? With places like Wakanda or even Asgard, you could have an idea as to how those places came to be. But with Quantumania, so much more needs to be explained. Now, I'm not demanding an explanation just because I want one, but I think the science of Marvel movies is interesting, and a slideshow explaining the physics of Quantumania would have been more investing than this movie. The lack of any scientific explanations also makes it feel less like a cohesive story. Ooze feels out of place in the MCU. I get that the story is made more readable by everyone speaking English, but a magic juice that allows everybody to understand each other is cheap and kind of dumb. I get that literal magic exists in the MCU, but magic has its place, and even when it does, it's still more explained than anything that happens in this movie. Anyways, they go to a cantina, like in Star Wars, and Janet gets the two of them a table and a shot of ooze. Hank has a bit of interference in his earpiece. I wonder what that's about. She's here to meet Kravlar, Bill Murray's character. One thing I'll mention in passing is that Kravlar has no clue what ants are. We'll get back to that. She asks for help, he asks for food, and back to the Langs! I hope you realize how little is happening in between cuts by now. Like, Scott and Cassie get kidnapped. On to the Pims. Janet and the gang have a poorly written conversation. Back to the Langs. Cassie tells Scott to drink ooze. What are the Pims up to? Janet gets a new fit and a new whip. It's been a while since we've seen the Langs, huh? Everyone tells Scott to drink ooze, and then he gets asked about holes, and someone says the subtitle of the villain. The Pims go to a bar and meet Bill Murray. This has taken 17-ish minutes. I'm not asking that all of this is removed, just that it's better paced. Quaz confirms that they don't know anything, and Barbie says to take them away. But Scott's like, "We just want to go home." And Barbie says, "At least you still have a home." What did that prove? Barbie explains that the Conqueror fellow destroyed their homes, and though they tried to revolt, quote, "it was never enough." Cassie is worried about how the city is being, like, really oppressed right now and offers to help, but Scott tries to talk her out of it, mentioning that they could have been gone for years by now, but Cassie is really adamant about helping. Then Scott whispers in the most quiet and delicate voice in the entire film, "Let's just find the others. Nobody knows this place better than Janet." And I guess Barbie has the hearing of that kid from earlier because she hears him whisper the word Janet from an absolute trek away. That's about 20 paces. She says, "I know her. She shouldn't be here." But back to the Pims. Janet tells Kravlar that she's looking for 2 more humans. Kravlar says, "Oh, right, you guys call yourselves humans up there." And Hank asks, "Are you not human?" "No, Hank. How could he possibly?" He responds with, "Not technically, but yes, in the ways that matter." This is about him and Janet having the sex. This frame is perfect, and I'm good. Okay, I was going to move it to match up with the rest of the things, but this frame is perfect. Then people with guns enter, but Kravlar asks for time to talk. He mentions that Janet left them with him, and that her family doesn't know how many people died because of what she did. This is a reading of the scene. Janet, "Let them go. He just wants me." Kravlar, "But you want them, so they're coming too. Along with those other friends of yours." I heard about them, but he did too. We'll get back to that. And he sent the hunter. Hank, what kind of hunter? Kravlar, not a man, not a machine. A mechanized organism designed only for killing. We'll get back to that. Hope, where are they? Kravlar, no idea. Dead. Probably dead. We'll get back to that. I promise I'll dispute a number of these in a minute. I think I'm writing this in the present, but I got this feeling inside my bones. It goes electric, baby, when I... Two reinforcement ships arrive, and there's a brief fight scene that ends in them stealing Kravlar's ship. Trust me, it was lame. Hope then confronts Janet about the sex thing. This is a reading of that. Hope, really? Him? Janet, he used to be charming. Hank, that guy? Janet, I was down here for 30 years, Henry. I had needs. Hank, look, I get it. I've got needs too. I thought the next line was, I had did it with someone a few times. Turns out it's, I had dinner with someone a few times. Her name was Linda. It didn't work out. Janet, what went wrong? Hank, she wasn't you, baby. Someone felt epic after writing that line. Then they made a phone call to their ex-wife using their newly acquired writing prowess in the hopes of getting his girl back. Poor guy got a restraining order instead. It's Langan time. I'm sorry. Barbie tells Quaz to evacuate the city and tells Laserface, whose name is Zalem, to get the Langs far away, because if they're looking for Janet, he's looking for them. Then several enemy ships show up. How did the Conqueror find them? How does he even know that they're in the city or Quantumania as a whole? Isn't this supposed to be a hidden revolutionary city? Kravlar didn't know where they were. I'm not averse to the idea that the Conqueror has a way to track people, but he clearly doesn't, because if he did, he'd have destroyed the city already by tracking Barbie or someone. Barbie yells, "You led them straight to us!" Girlie, you literally kidnapped them. Barbie gets stuck in taser whips, so Cassie runs over to help her. Now, this is the first time that we see her being independent in this movie. It's also now revealed that Cassie has a suit. She fails to save Barbie, and her dad has to save her. Scott tries to teach her how to do single target takedowns, and Cassie says, "I know how to do it, Dad. I messed up on the timing." I don't like Cassie. The old Cassie would have loved her dad's Superhero 101 course, and I think any Cassie, especially the smart one, would admit that she objectively just failed. She's uninteresting, unexplored, and poorly acted, though I think that acting issue, all of those issues, are the director's fault. Mostly because if the direction was good, then the movie would have been good. The newly freed Barbie, whose name is Gentora, goes over to Quaz, who mentions leaving. Then the Hunter arrives and destroys Scott and Cassie's escape ship house thing. Then we get the reveal that the Hunter is Darren from the first Ant-Man. Okay. Darren says, "Darren is dead. There is only MODOK." MODOK is by no means one of my favorite characters, but Jesus, you really demoted him to this? An even more forgettable spin-off of the guy that he was before, working as the second in command of an entirely different villain? MODOK is one of the smartest people on Earth. Back to the Pims, nothing happens in this scene. Hope suggests finding Scott and Cassie, and Janet's like, "No, there's something I've got to do first," and Hope's like, "What are you so afraid of?" Scott and Cassie are in jail. Darren comes up and explains what happened. Apparently destroying the suit in that manner made his head big as hell, but the Conqueror found him and turned him into the ultimate weapon. It is also in this scene that we see MODOK's bare naked baby ass. In my notes for this movie, it says, quote, "The scene where we see MODOK's bare naked baby ass was someone's magnum opus." It's also in this scene that we get the one and only line that describes how they actually got down here. Darren says, "But I did it. I got you here. I found your signal, Cassie. Thanks for that, by the way. I couldn't have done it without you." Several things, but we'll get back to that. This scene is an explanation of what Janet was up to. The Conqueror, after landing next to her in the intro, told Janet he was a traveler with a ship from the future that could traverse the multiverse, but it was broken. They found a way to recharge the ship's energy core, but since the ship was controlled with his mind, she peered into its thoughts when she touched it. Apparently she didn't know his name was Kang and needed to peer into his mind to find that out. Also, he destroys realities. Kang offers to take her home. She asks, "And how many worlds will die if you get out?" Kang says, "Not yours." So Janet steals the core, shoves gross shurikens into it, and scrambles like an egg lest she get folded like an omelet. He now needs Pym particles to get the core back. Over the years, he turned Quantumania into a paradise, an empire with an extra millennia of technology. Now, I'd promised that I'd get back to many things, those being the following. How did they know Cassie built a plot device? How did Darren manipulate a quantum telescope to move matter? That's the equivalent of pulling someone through a security camera. How did they get matter down into Quantumania without the use of Pym particles, which we know they don't have, because if they did, they would have shrunken the core themselves? Now, maybe there is some other way of getting things down into the quantum realm. Kang does have an extra millennia of technology, after all. But if there was, couldn't they use that to fix the ship, or to find a way to escape Quantumania? I understand that Kang needs Pym particles to fix his ship, so he has to move them down here, but do you think that if he just waited long enough, eventually Janet would show back up again? Why didn't whoever banished Kang strip him of his suit and gun? I'd like to know too. This movie acts as a mainline introduction to Kang because you didn't watch Loki. I did. Kang is easily the best part of this movie, and he's the reason that this is the best scene. He has a commanding presence, and every line he says makes things more threatening. This is a rough reading of this scene. Scott mentions he's an Avenger. Kang: "Have I killed you before?" They all blur together after a while. He then explains that he needs Scott's help to fix his ship. Scott: "And why would I do that?" Kang: "Because you want to get out of here, and I need to get out of here, because I know how it ends." Cassie: "How what ends?" Kang: "All of it. I don't live in a straight line. I'm gay. I like dick. So if you want to stop what's coming, and trust me, you do, I am the only shot you have." Cassie: "What's coming?" Kang: "Me. A lot of me." He mentions that they exiled him down here. Scott refuses to help, so Kang threatens to kill Cassie and traps Scott in a time loop where he watches her die for eternity. He then grabs Cassie with his telekinesis. "Do you want her to live, or do you want her to die? You think I'm lying? Do I look like a liar to you? And based entirely on the color of your skin." Yeah, Kang is incredibly well acted by Jonathan Majors, who, holy shit, strangulation? He's got fun hobbies. Scott begrudgingly agrees to help him, and Kang opens a portal to the core. Darren explains that he needs to get inside of the core and shrink it back to size, and be hasty because his mind will be undone otherwise. Also, the Pyms arrive. Scott then spends the next few minutes in a probability storm where he sees multiple possible versions of himself. It's described as being, "You're in Schrodinger's box and you're the cat." I've mentioned Schrodinger in both of the video essays that I've made so far, which is neat. Now, the things I want to note is that they hear Cassie's voice coming from his radio, and they all pull some ants shit to get him to the core. And the core doesn't shrink at first until Hope shows up, and it does. Janet explains that they cannot give the core to him even though he has Cassie, but Kang just shows up, takes the thing, and Janet, and does not give Cassie back. Darren destroys the ship that Hank is in, but fret not, because the shadow of an ant arrives over Hank. The next scene is just Kang talking to Janet, explaining that he broke time and alluding to the idea of having lost things, but not the actual things that he's lost. And Cassie escapes some guards. Let's move on. By now, I bet you're wondering, but what about the ants? This is an Ant-Man movie after all. Well, the chattering that Hank's been hearing the entire movie is from the smart ants in the ant farm trying to contact him. They went down to Quantumania with him, got stuck in a time dilation field, and became a Class 2 civilization, which should be impossible because a Class 2 civilization requires the full usage of the energy from the sun. A sun that they don't have. When they came down, they passed through a time dilation field. Note, that doesn't mean that they went back in time. They just kind of slowed down. And we know they didn't go back in time because Kravlar doesn't know what ants are. This is the first group of ants we've seen in an hour in an Ant-Man movie. All the other Ant-Man films have also done something new with the tech. The first Ant-Man introduced Pym particles, giving us shrinking suits and scaling shurikens. In Captain America Civil War, we see Scott use Pym particles to make himself bigger. In Ant-Man and the Wasp, they make shrinking cars and suitcase skyscrapers. In this movie, we get nanotech suits, which we've seen before, and smart ants, which have been reduced to a deus ex machina. Also, this setting is fundamentally unfit for Ant-Man. Shrinking is cool because of scaling. How does a model town differ when you're traversing it? How does a city pale in comparison to an absolute giant? How does a Thomas the Tank Engine toy double as an action set piece and an active weapon? The scale of fighter to object has an effect on the fight. But putting Ant-Man in an abstracted world where most of the movie takes place outside is a fundamentally unfit setting for Ant-Man. Imagine putting Poison Ivy in the Sahara Desert. She couldn't do jack shit, there isn't even grass. I get that limiting a person's resources or powers can make for a great story because it forces them to get creative with what they can do, like in Thor Ragnarok, or show them that they're stronger than the things that they used as a crutch, like in Thor Ragnarok. But this setting isn't limiting his powers, it's limiting his creativity. No object here changes the fight at any scale, and Scott has full access to his abilities, so this doesn't work. Do note, I'm not saying that you just can't put Scott anywhere. I'd love to see him tackle the mirror dimension. Imagine that. Thousands of radio reflections changing scale as they rotate. That would work because the mirror dimension is an alteration of real-world objects, which Ant-Man movies rely on. But by putting him here in an open field of abstraction, it just doesn't work, and the entire movie suffers because of it. So the ants have some ideas. Cassie dispatches some guards and rescues Gentora. Kang starts sending out a message to the city about leaving and enacting revenge, but Cassie and Gentora interrupt the signal, and Cassie gives out her own message. This is a reading of said message. He's not invincible. I know it might feel like it's too late, like all we do is lose, but the family I've lost taught me to keep fighting. Side note, they haven't been lost, they've just been separated. And if they were here, they would too. We need to look out for the little guy. Side note, that's the name of Scott's book. My dad taught me that. Because when people needed help, he didn't look the other way. Side note, yes he did. You remember that line, just because it's not happening to you doesn't mean it's not happening, about your dad trying to leave because this wasn't his fight? And neither do we. Come to the tower, fight back. I know you've been waiting. Now is the time to strike. He knows he can't take all of us. Side note, yes he can. Side note, this was not the theme of the movie. They tried this before. They just said it was never enough. And when they try this time, they still need thousands of additional resources, those being the super evolved ants. This is not a revolution story. This is a savior story. Hope, Scott, and Hank track the signal and head to Kang City. Cassie and Gentora free the others. Scott goes full kaiju, and Kang erects a barrier around his palace. Are you laughing at erects? Grow up, dog. Anyways, Kang ejaculates that they need to bring him down. The people of the revolutionary city arrive in their ship houses, and a sequence of action scenes happen. I'm not going to criticize them, but just know they're boring and unfunny. Cassie then makes herself big and beats Darren's face in. This is a reading of the few lines that make Darren 180. Darren, you think this is over? Come on, let's go. Cassie, Darren, just stop trying to be whatever this is. Darren, I don't know what to be. Tell me what to be. Cassie, I don't know, just don't be a dick. Darren, it's too late. Look at me. I'm such a dick. Cassie, it's never too late to stop being a dick. Then she runs off to help her father. This line alone shifts Darren's identity from MODOK to not a dick. Darren has longed for revenge ever since the moment he was banished here 13-ish plus years ago. And the line, "Don't be a dick," stated by a teenager he'd sworn he'd kill, makes him drop his allegiance to the man that saved his life and weaponized him. MODOK is a bitch. Scott does a cannonball maneuver, which brings down the barrier, and that inspires Kang to get involved. Kang just starts killing people, including Zalem, who has had like 4 lines of dialogue in this movie so far. Now, I think this is supposed to be a dramatic moment in the story, but I don't care for Zalem. The movie never made me care for Zalem. Then the protagonists show up. Ant-Man is out of his league. Someone should really tell the writers that. Kang has telekinesis, portals, platforms, and obliteration lasers, and I don't use the term obliteration lightly. He has lasers that, upon grazing you, leave you atomized, less than atomized. In the same scene, you can see Kang obliterate extras, but when it comes to Scott Lang and his cast of shrinking friends, he kisses them on the cheek, sings them a lullaby, and gently sets them down on his thighs. I got lost in the analogy. I get that saying just shoot them is a cheap suggestion because often the reason a character is really difficult to kill is because they are very good at not being shot. But you really could just shoot them, dude. Or grab them with your unblockable mind powers. The writers created a character that was too strong, so they nerfed him in the final battle. Anyways, the ants show up, Darren has a moment of redemption, Kang gets his suit destroyed by the ants, and MODOK's bitch ass has an extended death scene. Janet radios in and mentions that they've got one shot back. Everyone goes through the portal, but Scott doesn't get the chance. Then Kang shows up. His suit is broken, but he's still a strong, capable black man who hits Scott with the same force that Jonathan Majors uses on his girlfriend. Kang and Scott get into a tussle, and Scott is getting his ass kicked, but luckily, Kang stupidly decides to slam Scott's head into the power core, which gives Scott the opportunity to slam scale shurikens into it again. Hope rushes back through the portal, Kang dies, and the core collapses in a visual mess that I cannot believe people were paid real American dollars to make. This strands Hope and Scott in Quantumania for 2 whole minutes. Then the portal reopens and they can go home. So much for that one shot back, huh? Scott has a brief existential crisis about the chance that Kang comes back. God, Kang mentioned that more of him was coming, and that if he was let out, he could prevent whatever horrible event happens in the future. This is interesting. He's a villain that is trying to prevent a worse fate from happening through immoral means. Destroying him could yield a worse fate for the future. That's an interesting moral conundrum to put a character in, and they just didn't do that. Scott literally says, maybe stop asking so many questions, Scott. Then in the after credits scene, all of the Kangs assembled together because the heroes of 1999 have tickled the balls of the multiverse. That's all, folks. And one last thing. Across 3 films and 8 years, Scott has lost nothing. Scott has lost nothing. None. Nada, 9, 0, zilch, jack, bull, roar, nothing. This film changes nothing about the status quo. Nobody dies, nobody grows. It only serves as an introduction to Kang, something Loki already did. It is functionally useless, horribly written, and above all, real bad. Well, that video is 40 minutes long. Easy 40 minutes. Like, that's for sure 40 minutes. And if I'm wrong, I'm gonna feel really dumb in editing this. Yeah, I feel like anything that I do next is probably going to be shorter. Not because this was too much work or something, but because I just don't think I'll have this much to say about whatever I talk about next. Please like and subscribe, because otherwise I've spent 40 minutes talking about Quantumania into an abyssal void that gives me no response. So I will see you next time. I've been Tags, and if I should have an outro, and I still don't have an outro. Bye.